Good evening. Welcome to another episode of History Done Right. My name is Timothy Barrett. These episodes are brought to you by Bradford Christian College. You saw the slide for Bradford Christian College in the intro. I encourage you to visit their website, bradfordchristiancollege.com. Find out more information, see if it's not an option for you in your education or for your maybe graduating student, homeschool student, what have you. Number of degrees are offered, including Master of Arts in Theological Studies. Um, and it's an online college, but it's not an alone college. You have a mentor that is assigned to you that will walk with you through your program, keep you on track, keep you challenged, answer questions, help you dig deeper into concepts that are interesting to you in your studies, and see that you complete the program that you're wanting to complete. So check it out, bradfordchristiancollege.com. Description and link in the description below for you, and you can find out more information there. Okay, so if you've been with me in this series, you know that we're actually walking through history, but not history that would be the typical way history is presented in schools today. And sadly, maybe even in Christian schools today. I don't know, some Christian schools. But we're actually using the Bible as our beginning of understanding history. And it makes sense to do that because of all the writings we have, it's the one writing that we can count on as being a fair and accurate representation of how things got started. And so we've been using it in that way, and leaning on it as true history, how things got started, and understanding that it becomes causative of later effects, most particularly the fall of man and the sinful nature that results from that, sin entering the world, and sin bringing, therefore, death into the world, and all of the related consequences of that. So we take that seriously in a Christian or providential view of history. We take that seriously. It's true. It has consequences. Um, it plagues mankind. Mankind needs a cure. There is a cure for that. In our walk through history, we haven't reached it yet, although we've already heard about it. And that's when God, speaking to the serpent, preaches the gospel. And based on what we looked at, the way we understand the scriptures, Adam and Eve heard that gospel message, even though it wasn't directed to either one of them. It was directed, presumably, at the serpent. They heard the gospel message and they put their faith in that gospel message. And we looked at that last episode. I'm not going to go into it now, but please go to the Bradford Christian College YouTube channel and click on the playlist. You'll find the History Done Right playlist, and you can view previous episodes there. If you're brand new to this, if this is the first time you've stumbled across this video and you're thinking, what in the world is going on, go to that playlist. I encourage you to view the first 2 or 3 episodes because we set a foundation for everything that we're doing in this series, in those first 2 or 3 episodes. Okay, so we have been working with this timeline here, showing that this 1 a.m. is 1 Anno Mundi, that is the first year of the world. The 710 JP, that's the Julian period or the Julian calendar. The BC over here would be the Gregorian calendar, what we're familiar with, so 4004 BC. In the Julian period, and this comes from Bishop Ussher, and I'm going to mention the specific dates that we have here, but I don't mean to say that we have to believe these specific dates. Bishop Ussher has his, at least what he thinks is good reasoning to come up with these specific dates. I list the dates here, and as we're able to, as we keep building a timeline out, I'll continue to list dates, specific days even, just because it helps to remind us of the passage of time. So, we're not talking about some nebulous time period that is the period of creation. Okay? No, the period of creation was 6 days. And so in the Julian period, right, it could have started on October 23rd, and that means that day 6 would have landed on October 28th. And the first Sabbath would have been October 29th. Now, frankly, as we read into the Old Testament, we know that, for example, the nation of Israel doesn't even use those names for months, right? The names of their months are different than ours, right? So in that sense, these are manufactured months and days for that time. But what it does is it tells me that, yeah, we're talking about 6 actual days, 24-hour periods. And that's what it would look like if I opened a calendar and I saw, October 23, year 1, creation started, right? That's what it would look like. And that, for me, it keeps in mind the passage of time and what kind of time we're talking about this past. Okay, so the last few episodes have been here, the fall of man, which Bishop Ussher says is probably day 10 of the world. Okay, the biblical text doesn't tell us specifically. I think he actually has a argument that he gives for why it would be the 10th day, October 1st. No, is that what that says? That shouldn't say October. Yeah, October 1st. October 1st in the Gregorian. November 1st in the Julian. But again, we're not going to quibble over that. We want to see the passage of time. All right, so we've been in this period, the fall of man. We've actually read through in Genesis chapter 3 about the curse on the serpent, the curse on the woman, the curse on the man, which is really more a curse on the land. But in that curse, there's also a mention of you're going to die, right? In verse 19, for dust you are, and unto dust shall you return. And in fact, it would seem as though a reason the ground is cursed is because man was taken from the ground. And it's like that ground is going to reject him or fight against him now in this curse. Okay, so we read about verses 17 through 19. And let's see, I guess we read about verse 20. This is where Adam called his wife's name Eve. And this was a verse where Matthew Henry suggests this indicates that Adam, and probably Eve as well, actually believed the gospel message spoken by God. Because Adam, for the first time, Adam calls his wife Eve. Previous to this, she was woman, for she was taken out of man, right? But now he calls her Eve, life, the mother of all the living, in anticipation of the blessing of childbirth. And that there would be that seed of the woman that will be the salvation of mankind. And so that's what we saw in verse 20. All right, let's move forward. Verse 21 talks about the Lord God making coats of skins and clothing them. We're going to jump here to verse 22. And the Lord God said, behold, the man is become as one of us to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. All right, so interestingly, God put no other protection around the tree of the knowledge of good and evil other than his direct command, right? The law that he laid down was to be the protection, or perhaps the punishment attached to the law was to be the protection to keep Adam and Eve from eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The deception was too great, the temptation too strong, and Adam and Eve failed. Now here, God doesn't just say, well, now given what's happened, don't eat of the tree of life. He actually places a protection there. Now, we'll see what Matthew Henry says, and this is probably going to be another instance. I mean, if you've watched these videos, you know I tend to go on about things and then we read, and Matthew Henry says it all much better than I do. But let me have my fun here. It appears that there could be an issue, perhaps even an irredeemable issue, if Adam and Eve eat of the tree of life, given their indulgence, sinful indulgence in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The second thing is there in verse 23, if you remember, if you've been faithfully following along these episodes, if you remember when we read about the creation of Adam, what we read there in chapter 2 is that Adam is created outside of the garden, and then he's taken and placed in the garden. Verse 23 is more confirmation of that, because God sends him forth from the garden to till the ground from where he was taken. Right? So he's sending him back to whatever dirt pile out there God used to first create Adam. But notice in verse 24, it tells us that God drove out the man. Okay, now, why would you have to drive somebody out of a place? Well, generally speaking, because the person doesn't want to go, right? No, don't make me leave. Don't make me leave, right? I think some suggest that the language here shows to us the repentant heart of Adam and Eve. They didn't want to leave God's presence, but God had to drive them out. We'll see if Matthew Henry speaks to that, or if I've highlighted that part of Matthew Henry about this. But just some observations from your kindly host about those verses we just read, 22 through 24, and let's see what Matthew Henry says. They were justly discarded and shut out of paradise. They were justly discarded. That's what you do with playing cards, right? You have the discard pile. They were justly discarded and shut out of paradise, which was a part of the sentence implied in that you shall eat the herb of the field. Right? And that's referencing back to, the sentencing after the fall and suggesting that the fruit of the garden wouldn't be available to them. This signified the exclusion of him and all his guilty race from that communion with God, which was the bliss and glory of paradise. Okay, so recall, in their state of innocence, however often it happened, Adam and Eve enjoyed communion with God. In fact, we read about in the cool of the evening, God's moving through the garden. I think it's kind of an assumption that, okay, so prior to that fall, maybe that was a regular happening. But in the cool of the evening, God would show up in the garden, and Adam and Eve would walk with him and talk with him and what have you. That's gone. That's gone for Adam. That's gone for Eve. That's gone for all of their descendants. That kind of communion in the garden. And presumably, that suggests that the communication between man and God is now somehow fractured, somehow different, and that has therefore ongoing consequences in history. Right, and we see that pretty quickly in the Bible. We should watch for it in history. The failure of men to acknowledge God, to seek out his wisdom. Perhaps even some who shake their fist in defiance of how could you do this to us, God, and put us adrift like this. Forgetting that, as Matthew Henry said here, Adam and Eve were justly discarded from the garden. The tokens of God's favor to him and his delight in the sons of men, which he had in his innocent estate, were now suspended. The communications of his grace were withheld, and Adam became weak and like other men. His acquaintance with God was lessened and lost, and that correspondence which had been settled between man and his maker was interrupted and broken off. So Matthew Henry is getting to, in a much better way, saying what I was mentioning, that the communion, the communication between Adam and God is now very different. It's broken, it's lessened. I mean, at least we can say that after being shut out from the garden, if the cool of the evening comes for Adam, God is not walking through the garden with him like before. Right? Like that's gone. It's gone. He was driven out as one unworthy of this honor and incapable of this service. Thus, he and all mankind by the fall forfeited and lost communion with God. Okay. He, Adam, and all mankind, everybody who descends from Adam, by the fall forfeited and lost communion with God. Right? And right there, Matthew Henry is saying what was the simple lesson taught to the Puritan children. In Adam's fall, we sinned all. And so this explains much about the condition of mankind ever since. lost communion with God. Why? Because of sin. Sin that means I'm guilty. And this is how we live. We live knowing we're guilty and trying to figure out what to do about it. And many people, I don't know if it's most people, many people try all kinds of things to take away that guilt, but it's all vain, because there's only one solution to the guilt that we have. And God preached it, Genesis 3:15. There's one solution, there's one cure, there's one way, there's one truth. All right. Notice what Matthew Henry says here, because yeah, the one thing that we do in our fallen condition very well is, well, I don't know if it's very well is the right way to say it. What we do with great urgency and energy is we try to rationalize everything. We try to rationalize and we try to blame shift. And so, wow, God, did you really have to punish us this way? Like, isn't that too harsh? How could you be so hard? How could you be so unloving, God? Notice what Matthew Henry says here. He, that is God, might justly have chased him, Adam, out of the world. But he, God, only chased him, Adam, out of the garden. This is a good sentence for a commonplace book to keep perspective. Right? As we're teaching our children the true history of the world, and we're talking about Adam and Eve being chased out of the garden, remember, children, God could have justly chased them out of the world, right? Swept them away, made it as though they were never here, even. Matthew Henry goes on. He might justly have cast him, he, God, might justly have cast him, Adam, down to hell, as God did the angels that sinned when he shut them out from the heavenly paradise. Another important part of history, there are beings who rebelled against God, apparently. There are beings who sinned and were never given a chance at redemption, as far as we know. There is no angel other than by observation who can know what it means to be redeemed. There is no bad angel who, through a conversion process, will become a good angel. Redemption is a gift unique to man by God's grace. As the great Andre Crouch said in one of his songs, when I say that I'm redeemed, the angels must fold their wings. because they don't know that. They don't know redemption other than by observation. They witness it, right? They witness redemption. They don't know it as their life experience. Okay. God might justly have cast him, Adam, down to hell as he did the angels that sinned when he shut them out from the heavenly paradise. But man was only sent to till the ground out of which he was taken. He was sent to a place of toil, not to a place of torment. Okay, you got to follow with. I'll stop interrupting. Let's just follow the beautiful way Matthew Henry puts this together. Okay. Man was sent to a place of toil, not to a place of torment. Man was sent to the ground, not to the grave, to the workhouse, not to the dungeon, not to the prison house, to hold the plow, not to drag the chain. His tilling the ground would be recompensed by his eating of its fruits, and his converse with the earth whence he was taken was improvable to good purposes, to keep him humble and to remind him of his latter end. I mean, Matthew Henry, I'm going to say, probably still is, maybe is even better, but a great theologian, but he's also a really good author. And what he says here, it's worth just reading again and again. It's worth memorizing. Because what does it tell us? It tells us that God's judgment is mingled with mercy. Because justly, he could have sent us to a place of torment, but he sent us to a place of toil. And you know what's interesting? He sent us to a place of toil. He sent us to work the ground, to till the ground. Now, I don't know everything that went on leading up to Adam eating of that fruit and sinning. I mean, the one thing I know for sure is that Eve ate first, and then she turned and gave to Adam who was with her. Now, that happened presumably immediately after a conversation that Eve had with the serpent. But see, Adam and Eve weren't put in the garden to have a conversation with the serpent. They were put in the garden to actually keep it and dress it. And whatever that meant. As far as we know, it didn't mean pulling weeds, but it meant something. It meant working the garden. And so now it also would seem that the fruit of the trees of the garden was just readily available to them. That, in other words, it doesn't necessarily seem the case, based on what we can understand, that they had to work really hard to get some fruit off the tree. It's like, no, like whatever their work was more like just pure pleasure. And had they been busy about dressing and keeping the garden, maybe they wouldn't got caught up in a conversation with the serpent. Right? I'm just going to suggest that. Like, if the serpent had come along and started to talk to them, and they said, "Sorry, we're busy. We can't talk now." Not even say sorry. Just don't bother. like you do to the annoying people that knock on your front door and say, "I'm not interested," because you just have other things to do, right? Maybe that could have been helpful for them, right? If they're busy keeping and dressing the garden, and they could have said, "Look, I'm too busy. I've got these things. Go away. Not interested." It could have been. What I'm saying is, what does God sentence them to? It's going to be harder work now, but he sentences them essentially to do what they were to do in the garden, right? to till the ground, to keep and dress the garden. And that's why Matthew Henry says, one of the purposes here is to keep Adam humble, to help him remember, if I am humble and I don't do the things the way I want to do, but I do the things I'm supposed to do, that is in accordance with God's will, there's protection in that. Yeah, I'm going to sweat. It's going to be harder to get my food out of this ground because it's not the garden anymore. But there's a protection in that. Matthew Henry says, observe then that though our first parents were excluded from the privileges of their state of innocency, yet they were not abandoned to despair. God's thoughts of love designing them for a second state of probation upon new terms. Judgment mingled with mercy. All right. We're going to jump ahead in the book of Genesis to Genesis chapter 5, and specifically verse 5. And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Let's take that verse and let's see what Matthew Henry says here. Adam was made in the image of God, but when he was fallen and corrupt, he begat a son in his own image, sinful and defiled, frail, mortal, and miserable, like himself. Not only a man like himself, consisting of body and soul, but a sinner like himself, guilty and obnoxious, degenerate and corrupt. Now, this is the way it is, right? This is real history. Okay? Man begets man. That is, a body and soul. But man begets a sinner as well. A sinner guilty, obnoxious, degenerate, corrupt. God created Adam in his image, and there was an innocence. Fallen man, Adam, and all those who come after him, begets in his image, which includes a sinful state, being guilty, obnoxious, degenerate, and corrupt. Now, if I told you that every person is born a sinner, you might agree with that. I think there are some who think differently. They think that those who are born don't become sinners until they reach some age of accountability and they commit sin. And I think it makes for I think it's wrong. Matthew Henry didn't believe that. And to think that creates a really complicated circumstance regarding how do we think about who needs to be saved, right? I won't go there. Anyway, right, but if I said, okay, so everybody's born a sinner, and you said, sure, and I said, that means they're guilty. Yep, that's a sinner's guilty. Degenerate, you might not, you might cringe a little bit at the word, but you understand degenerate. Corrupt, yeah, certainly corrupt, yeah. The word obnoxious is kind of interesting. Like, if I said born a sinner, that means they're obnoxious. It's like, ah, really? So Noah Webster defines obnoxious as subject, answerable, liable, subject to cognizance or punishment. That's interesting. He gives a example sentence here. We know ourselves obnoxious to God's severe justice. Okay, so that's like, well, that's not what I think about when I think about the word obnoxious, right? It's obnoxious, I think, annoying, right? But obnoxious, subject to cognizance or punishment. I don't think I would have ever thought I would read a sentence that said, we know ourselves obnoxious to God's severe justice. I mean, if I ever did read a sentence like that before this, I would have thought, you're trying to say that we're annoyed with God's severe justice. And I mean, sure, I get that, maybe, but it'd be a weird sentence to me. Okay, so see the fourth definition, reprehensible, censorable, not approved as obnoxious authors. That sounds more like what I think of the word as obnoxious means. Odious, hateful, offensive. Okay, yeah, that's number 5 definition. The minister was obnoxious to the Whigs. Yep, I get that. But the number 2 definition, even the number 1 definition, but liable, subject to punishment. We know ourselves obnoxious to God's severe justice. I want you to use that sentence in the next couple of weeks here at church, right? If the idea of God's justice, his judgment comes up, I want you to use that sentence in a group, right? Well, we know that we're obnoxious to God's judgment. Everybody like, what? What? All right, anyway. Yeah, this is the circumstance now, right? This is part of the consequence of the fall. If we said that the fall is causative, what is an effect of the fall? Well, effect is, one of the effects is that those who come after the fall are going to be sinners. They're going to be guilty, obnoxious, degenerate, corrupt. This was Adam's own likeness, the reverse of that divine likeness in which Adam was made. But having lost it himself, he could not convey it to his seed. Note, grace does not run in the blood, but corruption does. A sinner begets a sinner, but a saint does not beget a saint. Oh my. You know, that kind of hurts. Think about it. A sinner begets a sinner, but a saint does not beget a saint. You know, as a parent, you then realize that your children need to hear the gospel preached, right? You can't just rely on the fact that, well, I've been redeemed, and so they'll be redeemed. They'll be redeemed because of my redemption. Preach the gospel to them. Call them to that. Call them to a lively, energetic embrace of that covenant into which they were born, your covenant household. Adam lived in all 930 years, and then he died. according to the sentence passed upon him, to dust you shall return. You see, God's word comes to pass, okay? What God proclaims will happen. I give you this evidence right here. Though he did not die in the day he ate forbidden fruit, yet in that very day he became mortal. Then he began to die. His whole life afterwards was but a reprieve, a forfeited, condemned life. Nay, it was a wasting, dying life. He was not only like a criminal sentenced, but as one already crucified, that dies slowly and by degrees. Okay, so this is getting depressing, right? But it's, it's Matthew Henry telling the truth. Adam was living out his sentence, right? He was dying slowly by degrees. Because the punishment for that sin must be borne. Or let's say this, the punishment for sin must be borne. The wages of sin must be paid. If they're not, if they're overlooked, if they're brushed aside, right? If the records of that sin are put in the burn bag and burned, or filed and hidden away, like so many files in history have been hidden away, there's not justice there. That's not justice. God will not deny himself. God will not act contrary to his nature, but mysteriously and gloriously, God has magnificent ways to always act in perfect harmony with the entirety of his nature, the entirety of his being. And so let's not take it lightly. Let's take it seriously that what God ordains does come to pass. And God ordained specifically that Adam would return to dust. And Adam did at the age of 930. And so what's really interesting is that Adam's age is the earth's age at that point, right? Adam died when he was 930 years old, and the earth was 930 years old when Adam died. All right, so that was a jump. We skipped over at least Genesis chapter 4 to get to this point, to kind of look at the conclusion of Adam's life. If you recall, when we first started, we did these separate timelines, like each 1,000 years of Old Testament history. And so for the first 1,000 years, it's, the first 1,000 years of the earth, essentially Adam, right? I mean, 930 years, 1,000 years, pretty close, right? When you think about the first 1,000 years of history, you can essentially think the life of Adam. If you want something that's an event that's closer to that 1,000-year mark, you can see here event of Enoch being translated, 987, a little closer to the 1,000 years. But essentially, that's it. It's not exact, but it's a good marker. Okay, so thinking about Genesis 4 through 6, we're going to read some pages. This will take a while probably, but we're going to read some excerpts from a work called The History of Redemption by Jonathan Edwards. Okay, and this is the Jonathan Edwards that Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, that Jonathan Edwards. And so let's see what he has to say. This period 1, from the fall to the incarnation, it says here. That's the Old Testament, right? The incarnation refers to the coming of Christ as a babe. Of course, the fall is the fall. Let's read what Jonathan Edwards has to say here. The great works of God in the world during this whole space of time were all preparatory. There were many great changes and revolutions, and they were all only the turning of the wheels of providence to make way for the coming of Christ. Hither tended especially all God's great works towards his church. The church was under various dispensations and in very various circumstances before Christ came. Okay, that's a really interesting sentence right there. The church was under various circumstances before Christ came. We won't dig any more into that. But all these dispensations were to prepare the way for his, that is Christ's coming. God wrought many deliverances for his church and people before Christ came. But these were only so many images and forerunners of the great salvation he was to work out. The church, during that space of time, enjoyed the light of divine revelation. They had, in a degree, the light of the gospel. Okay, so when he's talking about that during that space of time, he's talking about this period before Christ came. The church, before Christ came. They had, in a degree, the light of the gospel. But all these revelations were only so many earnests of the great light that he should bring, who came to be the light of the world. Okay, so earnests would be like an earnest, like earnest money when you buy a house, right? That's the little bit of money that you put down on account to say, yeah, I'm serious about buying that house, right? And in many ways, that earnest money is effectively saying, I bought the house. Okay, at least I'm committed to buying the house. And so these revelations, this the light of the gospel that they had, in a degree, pictured, were types of the great light, the light of the world, Jesus. That whole space of time was the time of night, wherein the church of God was not indeed wholly without light, but it was like the light of the moon and stars, a dim light in comparison of the light of the sun, and mixed with a great deal of darkness. Okay, so that whole space of time, again, I think you can think of that as essentially our Old Testament period, right? It's pre-Christ, it's pre-incarnation. It had no glory by reason of the glory that excelleth. The church had indeed the light of the sun, but it was only as reflected from the moon and stars. The church all that while was a minor. minor, a child, an infant. Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, differs nothing from a servant, though he be lord of all, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the father. Even so we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. And so again, Jonathan Edwards is talking about this, the circumstances of the church before the incarnation of the Christ. All right, so that's in his introductory words or writings here. And now he's going to, instead of just kind of broadly talking about from fall to incarnation, chapter 1 here, from fall to the flood. He's going to say something here at the beginning of this chapter that is really informative and ought to be an integral part of your understanding of history and your theology. From the fall to the flood, though this period was the most distant from Christ's incarnation, yet then was this glorious building begun. Okay, so if we think about our the way we should think about time right now, right? BC and AD, right? 4,004 years before Christ, we have the creation of the world, right? You can't get any more distant from Christ's incarnation than the creation of the world. And so for the creation of the world to the flood, that's as far back as you can go. You can get from Christ's incarnation. But what Jonathan Edwards is saying here is that even then, it began. And look at what he says here next. As soon as man fell, Christ entered on his mediatorial work. Okay, so what is his mediatorial work? To be mediatorial is to be a mediator. Webster defines mediator as one that interposes between parties at variance for the purpose of reconciling them. And then his second definition, and if you don't have a Webster's 1828 and you're thinking, do I really need a Webster's 1828? Well, let me offer this second definition as a reason why Webster's 1828 dictionary is a really valuable tool. It's a valuable tool biblically and historically. Number 2, mediator. By way of eminence, Christ is the mediator, all capital letters, the mediator, the divine intercessor through whom sinners may be reconciled to an offended God. And then he gives a quote that says, Christ is a mediator by nature, as partaking of both natures, divine and human. And Christ is a mediator by office, as transacting matters between God and man. You get a whole seminary lesson just in definition number 2 of mediator. All right, so what Jonathan Edwards is saying, man falls, boom, Christ is on the job. He's entered into his mediatorial work. Let's see where Edwards goes with this. Then it was that he began to execute the work and office of a mediator. He had undertaken it before the world was made. He stood engaged with the Father from eternity to appear as man's mediator and to take on him that office when there should be occasion. and now the time was come. Christ, the eternal Son of God, clothed himself with the mediatorial character, and therein immediately presented himself before the Father as mediator between a holy, infinite, offended majesty and offending mankind. He was accepted in his interposition, and thus wrath was prevented from going forth in the full execution of the amazing curse that man had brought on himself. Okay, this is powerful. I don't remember every single sermon I've listened to in my life. Okay, I'll acknowledge that. So I could very well be wrong. But no sermon that I can recall has this ever been included. I mean, I've certainly heard sermons about Christ the mediator, and as a mediator, right? I have a lawyer in heaven, right, arguing my case, or however that goes. But my sense of that is it was all, post resurrection stuff. I find this so comforting that from the beginning, there Christ is. And in an instant, he's in that office doing his mediatorial work. Edwards goes on, it is manifest that Christ began to exercise the office of mediator between God and man as soon as man fell, because mercy began to be exercised towards man immediately. There was mercy in the forbearance of God that he did not destroy him as he did the angels when they fell. Well, we read about that in Matthew Henry, right? Okay, so, yeah, but I thought we were talking about history, doing history right. Well, yeah, we are. What does history tell us? A true reading of history, a true acceptance of history, is that mankind is foolishly blind or blindly foolish to be angry at God. To ever for a moment say, God, how could you do this to me or to us or to mankind? You can't really love us if you do. In fact, mankind has every reason to be humbly grateful that Christ the mediator stepped in so that mankind was not destroyed as the angels were. That mercy began to be exercised immediately. Edwards goes on, but there is no mercy exercised towards fallen man except through a mediator. If God had not in mercy restrained Satan, he would immediately have seized on his prey. Christ began to do the part of an intercessor for man as soon as he fell, for there is no mercy exercised towards man but what is obtained through Christ's intercession. You got to do history right, or this isn't going to be part of the way you think about things. You understand things. And to recognize the gross unthankfulness through so much of history. Towards Christ, towards God. The blasphemous accusations through so much of history that mankind throws at God. The gross disrespect and dishonor to just ignore God, ignore Christ. You know, common saying is, um, but for the grace of God, there go I. Look, but for the mediatorial work of Christ, you don't go. Okay? I mean, uh, but for the mediatorial work of Christ, um, you were destroyed even before you came into existence. Oh God, how could you treat mankind this way? What? What are you talking about? Unless you're saying, how could you treat mankind this way? Like, how could you be so merciful to mankind after what we did, after what we've done, after what we do? All right, so we've read essentially one page of Jonathan Edwards' work, History of Redemption. And for me, it's been like one of the most eye-opening pages I've ever read in a book. It's like, why isn't this part and parcel of our regular instruction in history, in church? Maybe it is. Maybe I'm, there's a comment space below, right? Maybe I just missed it, right? Maybe everybody else got this instruction and was blessed by it, and I missed it, and now I'm having to catch up. I can accept that. I'm glad I got this page, right? I'm glad I got this because I think it so fills in this Christianity thing. If it so forever settles, it should, but I mean, maybe I'll fail at this in the future, but it forever settles this idea that, accusations can be thrown at God for like not, oh, how can he be a God of love and not like it should fill my heart all the more with love for Christ. That Christ was however the plan was set down between the Father and the Son before the foundations of the world, as we're told. In our lives, we make all kinds of plans. Yeah, tomorrow it'll go like this, and then tomorrow comes and we forget or we get busy or we get distracted and blah. But not Christ. Christ didn't look down and see, oh, well, I'll take care of that later. I know I'll take care of that later, right? The first instance that Christ was needed in his mediatorial role, there he was. All right, maybe just a little bit more here. When we read of God appearing after the fall in some visible form or outward symbol of his presence, we are ordinarily, if not universally, to understand it of the Son of God. John 1:18, no man has seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. He is therefore called the image of the invisible God, Colossians 1:15, intimating that though God the Father be invisible, yet Christ is his image or representation by which he is seen. Yea, not only this world devolved on Christ, that he might have the care and government of it, and order it agreeably to his design of redemption, but also in some respect the whole universe. And therefore, we may suppose that immediately on the fall of Adam, it was made known in heaven among the angels that God had a design of redemption with respect to fallen man, that Christ had now, the now being immediately upon the fall of Adam, Christ had now taken up on him the office and work of a mediator between God and man, and that they were to be subservient to him in this office. The they here would be the angels, right? And this would be, as we talked about before, presumably, I guess there's different theories or ideas on how this all went down, but presumably, Satan's rebellion, the third of the angels that rebel with him and then are cast down, that's all happened, presumably. And, the good angels, the 2/3, they're, they witness this, in whatever way they witness this rebellion and the casting down of these other angels. And those angels don't get to come back. Those angels don't get another chance. Those angels don't get redemption. Right? So all the angels know is you go bad, you stay bad. Right? That's all they know. And then the angels are watching, and Adam and Eve go bad. And then this word redemption rings through heaven. And it's like, what? Wait a minute, redemption? What's that? What's redemption? And, the word spreads. Christ the mediator is on the job for Adam and Eve. And we're to be ready to serve him in that role. That's real history. That's the unseen history that's happening behind the scene history. And it needs to be just as much of our history understanding as the scene, the drama of it, the providence, the mercy, the mediator, Christ, at work. All right, we're going to have to stop there. We will pick up here with Jonathan Edwards next time. Okay, why am I not writing? Like I should be able to write on here. There we go. Give myself a little marker there so that I know where to pick up next time. But we'll pick up with this next time as we continue to do history right, and we understand all of the aspects of history that have really happened and become causative of things later. Help us to understand how it is that we are in the situation we're in, and we're facing the things that we face. It gives us reason and explanation, but it gives us hope and comfort, therefore, because the God who was at work at the fall of Adam is the God who is at work today. So I hope you'll join us, Lord willing, next week as we continue our series, History Done Right. Thank you for being a part this week, this video. Like, subscribe, share, leave a comment. Correct me where I'm correctable. And continue to be a part of these episodes as we continue to do history right.